How many of your memories are lies you told yourself to survive? How many whispered silences did you mistake for love simply because they echoed your own desperation? Tell me, when he touched your skin, did you feel desired or just useful? And are you ready to face the truth that what you called affection was nothing but a transaction dressed in tenderness? There is a kind of abandonment far worse than being left. It is being needed without ever being truly wanted. You were not loved, you were tolerated. And this difference, this unbearable fracture, is where the wound begins. The most dangerous illusion is not the absence of love, it is the presence of false intimacy. We are creatures who crave meaning, and when it is denied to us, we invent it. We carve symbols from scraps of attention and call them devotion. But what if his kindness was strategy, not sincerity? What if every "I miss you" was a leash, not a longing? You became indispensable, not because you were cherished, but because you were convenient. You were the balm to his emptiness, the mirror for his ego, the silence that absorbed his storms without making a sound. And somewhere along the way, you mistook that for connection. You were never truly seen. Only your function was acknowledged, your capacity to hold, to soften, to stay. He didn't fall in love with you. He fell in love with what you healed in him. And that is the cruelest kind of need, because it wraps itself in the language of affection, all while hollowing you from the inside. You weren't his partner. You were his shelter, and shelters are not kissed for who they are entered and exited in times of crisis. But you stayed. Oh, you stayed, thinking loyalty would one day purchase love. Let me ask you this. If he could love you, wouldn't he have done so already? Love is not shy, it does not hide behind almosts and maybes and somedays. Love is violent in its clarity. It disrupts, it breaks patterns, it dares. And yet he never dared. He never stepped forward, not really. Because he was never walking toward you, only toward his comfort, his safety, his need to feel less alone. You became the silence between his chaos and his guilt. You were not the destination, you were the pause. And here's the truth most never want to hear. You were chosen not for who you are, but for what you allow. That is not love, Annie, it is utility. And yet, your heart still hopes, still argues, still lingers in the dream. But dreams rot when left in reality too long. This video will not give you comfort, but it will give you vision. A vision sharp, enough to cut the cords of self-deception and finally see what has always been there, buried beneath the performance. If you dare to keep watching, something inside you will break, and in that breaking, something else will finally begin. You were not chosen because you were rare. You were chosen because you were available, and perhaps this is the first wound, the unbearable truth that rips through the romantic veil we so desperately weave around the ache of being needed. There is a kind of attraction that feeds not on admiration, but on vacancy. The emptiness in him called out to the healer in you, not because he valued your soul, but because he sensed your willingness to carry what he could not. And so began the silent contract. You gave, he received. You forgave, he forgot. You stayed, he vanished, again and again, until the rhythm of pain became indistinguishable from the rhythm of love. But let me ask you, when did you start believing that endurance was proof of worth? Who taught you that love had to hurt before it could be real? There is an archetype we do not speak of, the wounded caregiver, the one who finds meaning in being the savior, but only because she has forgotten how to be the center of her own story. She confuses usefulness with intimacy, presence with affection. She offers warmth, not realizing it is being drained like oil from a sacred lamp, until the flame flickers into resentment. But it's too late. She has already explained away the cold nights, justified the silence, romanticized the neglect. She says he is complicated, sensitive, traumatized, but in truth she is afraid that if he didn't need her, no one ever would. So she becomes indispensable, hoping that eventually being necessary will transform into being loved. It never does. There is a violence in the way we abandon ourselves to be chosen by someone else. A violence so subtle it masquerades as virtue. You silenced your needs to keep the peace. You shaped yourself into 1,000 agreeable versions, all in the name of harmony. But harmony is not truth, and peace is not love when it requires your disappearance. You call it sacrifice. I call it erasure, the kind that leaves you hollow even in his arms, aching even when he's near, weeping without tears in the dead of night because you have become a stranger to your own reflection. Do you feel it now? That slow, creeping numbness that wraps itself around your joy like a fog? That is the cost of being his emotional support. You became the echo, not the song. He never truly saw you, only your function, your ability to soothe, to validate, to stabilize. He reached for you, yes, but only when he was drowning. You were the raft, not the shore. He clung to you during storms, but where was he when the sky was clear? You remember those moments, don't you? When your laughter was met with distance, when your vulnerability was dismissed with vague promises, when your love became a burden, too heavy for him to hold, and still you stayed, because your heart does not give up easily, because you thought loyalty was the currency of love. But love is not a transaction, it is a mirror. And when one side stops reflecting, the other is left staring into a void, desperate to be seen. You were not loved. You were managed, contained, admired perhaps, but never met fully. You were the pause in his chaos, the breath between his battles, the sanctuary where he could collapse, but never the path he walked toward with intention. He did not fear losing you, he feared losing what you offered. And that distinction is everything, because once he found another source of comfort, another shoulder, another mirror, he did not hesitate, and you were left breathless, betrayed, not by some grand betrayal, but by the slow erosion of significance. This is not heartbreak, this is awakening, and I invite you not to run from it, but to sit in its fire. For what burns now will one day illuminate the places where you forgot your own worth. There is a moment, often unspoken and almost always denied, when the soul begins to tremble beneath the weight of its own silence. It happens slowly, like a whisper folding into itself, until the noise of your unmet needs becomes deafening. And yet you do not scream, you do not flee. Instead, you smile, you stay, you perform the ritual of presence, the comforting voice, the understanding nod, the gentle forgiveness. All while something inside you decays. But do you see it now? Do you see that your gentleness was never mirrored, only used? That every time you poured yourself into him, it was not because you were overflowing, but because he had become a hole in the shape of a man. A hole so deep it could swallow your whole being and still ask for more. We do not fall into these roles by accident. They are summoned by ancient echoes, patterns carved by childhood, by ancestors, by unloved moments we buried in shame. Somewhere, long before him, you learned that being needed was the closest thing to being loved, that if you made yourself indispensable, you might finally become irreplaceable. But love is not earned through labor, it is revealed in recognition, and he never truly recognized you, only what you offered, your emotional labor, your stability, your tenderness. You were not a woman to him, you were a solution. And when solutions stop working, they are replaced. Not mourned, he may have held you, but he never held space for you. There is a profound difference. To hold space is to listen without controlling, to stay present without fixing, to see without reducing. But what did he really see in you? Did he marvel at the chaos of your spirit, the wildness of your thoughts, the storm and softness braided together in your being? Or did he simply memorize the parts that served his narrative and ignore the rest? Love is not about knowing the parts of someone that please you. It is about facing the parts that challenge you and choosing to stay anyway. He did not stay, not really. Even when his body remained, his soul had long since departed. There is a shadow that lives in those who cannot love, a shadow that fears exposure more than loneliness. These men, these broken kings of borrowed thrones, do not seek connection. They seek control, not because they are cruel, but because they are terrified. To love would mean to be seen would mean to be known, and to be known would mean that their facade, the carefully constructed persona they wear like armor, might crumble. You, in your honesty, were dangerous to him. You asked questions his spirit wasn't ready to answer. You offered depth when he could only survive on surfaces, and so he gave you enough to keep you close, but never enough to let you in. This is not love. This is self-preservation disguised as affection. Still, you convinced yourself otherwise. You became an alchemist, turning every ounce of his coldness into imagined warmth. You mistook crumbs for feasts, silence for peace, inconsistency for mystery. Because the alternative, admitting that he never loved you, would shatter the entire story you built around your worth. But this is where healing begins at the collapse. The truth is not the enemy, the lie is. The lie that told you this was love. The lie that told you it was your fault. The lie that made you shrink just to be chosen. You were never too much. He was simply too little, too small to hold the vastness of you, too afraid to meet your fire with his own. Let us descend deeper. Do you remember the nights when your intuition screamed and yet you silenced her? The subtle shifts in his voice, the sudden absences, the unspoken guilt that hung in the air like thick smoke. All of it, felt all of it denied. You gaslit yourself before he ever needed to, because believing the truth would have meant confronting the part of you that stayed. And that perhaps is the hardest wound to look at, the betrayal of the self. But within that betrayal lies a doorway, a place where the psyche splits and begins to reconstruct. This pain is not punishment, it is invitation. Invitation to reclaim what was abandoned. Your voice, your boundaries, your inner throne. There is no closure where there was no truth. He will not come back with clarity. He will not explain. He may even return, not out of love but habit. A moth drawn to the flame he never learned to tend. Do not mistake his return for redemption. Do not reopen the wound just because he knocks with familiar hands. He left you once, not out of confusion but out of choice. And if you let him, he will leave again. Not because you lack value, but because he has not grown. Let this be the cycle that ends with you. Let this be the chapter where the heroine does not bleed for love, but burns for her own rebirth. You see, healing does not begin when the pain stops. It begins when you stop betraying yourself to make the pain bearable. There was a time you thought endurance was a virtue, that staying through the storm proved your depth, your loyalty, your love. But loyalty to another that demands disloyalty to the self is not love, it is bondage. And bondage disguised as love is the most treacherous of prisons, because the bars are invisible and the key is buried in your own chest. You became the architect of your own confinement. You softened every edge, rationalized every wound, made excuses for his absence and poems out of his indifference, because to admit that he never chose you, truly chose you, would have forced a confrontation with the part of you that still believes you are not enough unless you are needed. But you were always more than what he needed. You were what he feared. Because unlike him, you did not run from your shadows, you carried them. You did not numb your wounds, you sang through them. And that kind of soul terrifies those who still live in hiding. He needed someone quiet, someone compliant, someone who would bleed without demanding an apology. But you were never meant to be a wound that heals others while festering in silence. You are the fire that consumes falsehood, the flood that drowns denial. And still, for a while, you played small, dimming your own light so he wouldn't have to squint. But tell me, what kind of love asks you to disappear in order to stay? The answer lies not in him, but in the mirror you avoided. Because what we tolerate in others often reflects what we secretly believe we deserve. The one who neglects us is often just the echo of our own neglect, a living embodiment of the voices we internalized long before he arrived. Perhaps there was a parent who loved you with conditions, or a world that taught you that to be wanted, you must first perform, perfect, provide. And so you offered yourself to a man who mirrored that blueprint. It is not your fault, but it is your inheritance. And like all unconscious inheritances, it will possess you until you name it, until you face the terrifying truth that his failure to love you is not proof of your unworthiness, but of his incapacity. You were the initiator, the one who tried, who called, who soothed, who forgave, again and again. He did not match you, Not because you were too intense, but because he was too absent. But absence, when disguised as mystery, is seductive. You thought he was deep, layered, complex. But what if he was simply hollow? A man addicted to the attention he could not return. A mirror that only reflects when convenient. And so you chased validation like it was love. You kept hoping he would wake up, evolve, see you, truly see you. But you cannot awaken someone committed to sleep. You cannot bloom in soil that rejects your roots, and you cannot force a soul to meet you where it has never dared to go within itself. Still, there is a part of you, wounded, loyal, aching, that clings to the what if. What if he changes? What if he comes back? What if I was wrong? But these are not questions, and they are distractions. Loops designed by the psyche to delay grief. Because grieving him means grieving the story. The one where you were loved. The one where he was good. The one where it all made sense. And that grief is sacred. It is the death of illusion. And like all deaths, it demands reverence. You are not mourning him. You are mourning the version of you that tolerated being unseen. You are mourning the hope that one day he'd meet you in the places he always ran from. Let yourself grieve. But do not mistake grief for a reason to return, because this is the moment where you decide, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. You reclaim what was always yours, your time, your tenderness, your truth. You begin to walk, not away from him, but toward yourself. And the path is not straight. You will doubt, you will ache. You will hear echoes of his voice in your memories, in songs, in empty beds. But one day, quietly, suddenly, you will realize you no longer need to be needed. That love is not proven by how much you endure, but by how deeply you are seen, chosen, and met. And that realization will burn. But oh, how it will cleanse. Because once you have known the difference between love and dependency, you will never again settle for a hunger disguised as devotion. And now here you are, not broken but awakening, not ruined but raw. The silence around you is no longer a sign of abandonment, but a sanctuary for truth to echo. And in this silence, you begin to remember, not just who he was, but who you were before he arrived, before the redefinitions, the adjustments, the emotional negotiations that stripped you layer by layer. Can you still feel her? The version of you that did not edit herself to fit someone else's inability to receive. She's still there, waiting beneath the rubble of compromise, breathing beneath the weight of years spent giving without being met. She is not angry. She is not bitter. She is simply tired of being forgotten. And now, at last, you begin to hear her voice again. She does not ask for revenge. She asks for return. Not return to him, but return to herself, to the laughter that came easily, the desires that were not filtered, the boundaries that were not apologized for. She does not want to be the hero of his healing. She wants to be the heroine of her own unfolding. But before that can happen, the final illusion must die. The idea that your worth is proven by what you endure. This is the chain. This is the lie. This is the spell that must be broken. For as long as you believe that suffering grants you love, you will continue to kneel before those who feed on your silence. You will call it devotion. You will call it destiny. But it is merely repetition, a psychic loop begging to be interrupted. And what of him? The man who watched you bleed and called it beautiful. He may return, as they often do, when he feels the absence of your light. Not because he has changed, but because the hunger for comfort does not die easily. He will speak of memories, of mistakes, of second chances. He may even cry. But listen, not to his words, but to your body. Your nervous system does not lie. Feel the contraction, the hesitation, the echo of old fear pulsing beneath the surface. That is not love calling. It is the familiar pull of a pattern trying to reclaim you. And if you return, it will not be romantic, it will be repetition, a revisiting of the very wound you were sent here to close. Do not go back just because the pain is quieter in his presence. Some silences are laced with poison. You were never asking for too much. You were simply asking the wrong person. The one who cannot meet your depth will always accuse you of being too intense. But your intensity is not a flaw. It is a compass. It reveals who is capable of sitting with your fire and who will flee at the first sign of heat. Let him flee. Let him disappear into the comfort of simplicity, of surface, of women who do not ask for presents because they have already given up on being fully seen. Let him find what he thinks he wants. You are here for something else. Not half-love, not performance, not the appearance of intimacy. You are here to be met, soul to soul, shadow to shadow, without masks, without delay. And until that meeting arrives, you walk alone, not in loneliness, but in reclamation. Every step away from him is a step toward the sacredness of your own gaze, toward mornings where you do not scan your phone for signs of his affection, toward nights where you do not wonder why you still feel alone with someone lying beside you. You begin to reoccupy your body, to speak with a voice no longer shaped to soothe another's insecurity, to dress for your own delight, to choose not as reaction, but as creation. This is what healing looks like, not a sudden transformation, but a series of small rebellions against the lie that your worth is found outside of you. And one day, not now, but inevitably, someone will see you. Not for what you offer, but for what you are. They will not flinch at your fire. They will not shrink beneath your strength. They will not ask you to become less so they can feel more. And you will not perform. You will not pursue. You will simply meet as equals, as mirrors, as souls that have already walked through the crucible and returned with their own names intact. But until then, you are not waiting. You are becoming. And that becoming is the most sacred act of defiance against everything that tried to reduce you. There is a silence that does not ask for sound. It asks for listening. And in that stillness now echoing softly within you, a truth begins to emerge. You were never here to be loved in fragments. You were not born to be a remedy for someone else's void. You did not enter this life to be chosen only when convenient, nor to be dimmed so another could feel luminous. Beneath all the moments that tried to convince you otherwise, something ancient in you always knew. Not with the mind, but with the body, the breath, the ache. And that knowing was never lost, only buried beneath the weight of needing to be enough for someone who never saw the fullness of your being. What you called love was often survival. What you felt as connection was often entrapment dressed in warmth. But the psyche is wise. It creates illusions only when the soul is not yet ready to face the depth of its own clarity. And now, you are ready. Ready not to forget what happened, but to see it without distortion. Ready to look at the story not as a wound, but as a mirror. One that reflects what you used to accept, not because you were weak, but because you hadn't yet remembered your worth. It is not the memory of him that you release. It is the version of you that believed this was all you could receive. And now that image crumbles, not with violence, but with reverence. Like autumn leaves surrendering to wind, you let go. Not with resentment, not with regret, but with recognition. He was not your soulmate. He was your signal. A teacher, cloaked in pain. A figure who arrived to reveal your patterns, to expose the unconscious beliefs that kept you seeking love through absence, presence through pain, identity through usefulness. He came to wound you, not to destroy you, but to awaken you. And now that the awakening has begun, the wound must no longer define you. You carry it, yes, but you do not become it. You are not here to be chosen for your utility. You are here to be met, soul to soul, shadow to shadow, presence to presence, not to be saved, not to be needed, but to be seen. Can you feel the difference? It is subtle, like the shift of light just before sunrise. A warmth that does not ask you to burn, a gaze that does not seek to consume. The next time you offer your heart, it will not be to prove your value, it will be to share it. And when you are met with anything less, you will no longer call it love. You will call it what it is, a misalignment, a lesson already learned. Let this truth settle into you like soil receiving the first rain after a long drought. Let it nourish the parts of you that forgot how to bloom without validation. Let it hold the little girl inside who still wonders. If she must do more, be more, give more, and just to be held, whisper to her now, you are already whole, you are already home. No more auditions, no more negotiations with those who fear your light. From this moment on, Your love will not be a strategy. It will be a sanctuary. And only those who arrive barefoot, unarmed, unafraid, and awake will be allowed to enter. You are not broken. You are rebirthing. You are not abandoned. You are being returned to yourself, and you are not too much. You are the exact magnitude of miracle this world needs to remember the taste of truth. So if the ache still lingers, do not run. Let it teach you how to stay with yourself. Let it show you how your presence was never the problem. It was the path. And the next time you are asked to be emotional support, pause. Ask instead, and who supports me? Because love is not a service. It is a sacred exchange. And you are no longer available for depletion disguised as devotion. Now, if what you heard here moved something silent within you, if the words did not just pass but pressed, if you feel that tremor in your chest that whispers, "This was meant for me," then know this: you are not alone. What lives in you lives in many. This channel, this space, this voice, it is not just content, it is communion. A gathering of souls ready to rise from their ruins, not with vengeance but with vision. If this touched you, then you belong here, with us, at Archimind. So do not let this moment dissolve. Anchor it. Leave a comment, not for the algorithm, but for your own becoming. Share it with someone still mistaking survival for love, and subscribe not to follow but to remember, again and again, that your transformation is sacred, and your truth, irreversible. You were never just support. You were always the soul. And now at last you remember.